Iran, the Shah, who was a close ally of the United States, was overthrown. A new government, led by religious leaders who saw America as an enemy, took power. This moment marked the beginning of a long and difficult period between the two nations, setting the stage for decades of confrontation and diplomatic standoffs that continue to shape global events. One of the first major crises was the Iran hostage crisis. Shortly after the revolution, a group of Iranian students stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran and took more than 50 Americans hostage. They held them for 444 days. This event shocked the American people and created a deep sense of anger and betrayal that has lasted for generations. For Iran, it was a powerful statement against what it saw as years of American interference in its country. This single event broke all diplomatic ties between the United States and Iran. From that point forward, their interactions were defined by suspicion, sanctions, and indirect conflicts, rather than cooperation and open dialogue. Over the years, the central point of contention has become Iran's nuclear program. The United States and its allies, particularly Israel, have long feared that Iran is secretly trying to build a nuclear bomb. Iran has always insisted that its program is only for peaceful purposes, like generating electricity. This disagreement led to heavy economic sanctions imposed by the United States to pressure Iran to stop its work. In 2015, a major deal was reached with several world powers, including the United States, to limit Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for lifting sanctions. However, the United States later pulled out of that deal, which made the situation even more tense and unpredictable. This long history of grievances forms the backdrop for the recent conflict. The mistrust is not just about nuclear ambitions. It is about regional power, influence in the Middle East, and fundamentally different views of the world. Both sides see the other as a major threat to their security and interests. The United States views Iran as a supporter of terrorism and a force for instability, while Iran sees the United States as an aggressive power seeking to dominate the region and control its destiny. This deeply rooted animosity created a fragile environment where any small spark could ignite a much larger and more dangerous fire. What it claimed were military and nuclear targets inside Iran. These strikes were significant, reportedly causing hundreds of casualties and escalating the situation to a level not seen before. This direct confrontation between Israel and Iran created an extremely volatile situation, pulling the entire Middle East closer to a full-scale war and pressuring their allies to take a side. In response to the Israeli attacks, Iran did not remain passive. It launched its own volleys of ballistic missiles aimed at major cities in Israel, including Tel Aviv and Haifa. These attacks caused injuries and widespread panic, showing that Iran was willing and able to strike back directly. The missile barrages demonstrated a new and frightening phase of the conflict, as both nations showed they were prepared to attack each other's homelands. This cycle of attack and counterattack created a dangerous momentum. Each action by one side was met with a stronger reaction from the other, pushing them further down a path of military confrontation, from which it became increasingly difficult to turn back. During this period of intense fighting, there were last-ditch efforts to find a diplomatic solution. President Donald Trump had announced a 2-week window for talks, hoping to de-escalate the crisis before it spun completely out of control. The United States and Iran engaged in indirect negotiations, with the country of Oman acting as a mediator to pass messages between them. However, these crucial talks collapsed even before the first Israeli airstrike on June 13. The deep-seated mistrust and the rapidly escalating violence on the ground made it impossible for diplomats to find any common ground or secure a ceasefire, leaving military action as the seemingly inevitable next step. The failure of diplomacy and the ongoing war between Israel and Iran set the stage for American intervention. With Israel, a key United States ally, engaged in a major conflict, and with Iran continuing its missile attacks, the White House faced a critical decision. The escalating violence and the direct threat to a strategic partner created immense pressure on the United States to act. The collapse of the Omani-mediated talks was the final sign that a peaceful resolution was out of reach. It was this combination of a regional war, failed diplomacy, and the perceived threat from Iran's advancing nuclear program, fuel enrichment plant, the Natanz enrichment facility, and the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center. These sites were chosen because they are central to Iran's ability to enrich uranium, a key process in creating both nuclear fuel and the material for nuclear weapons. The timing of the attack, coming after days of fighting between Iran and Israel, signaled a decisive and powerful entry by the United States into the conflict. A combination of advanced and powerful weapons was used to ensure the targets were destroyed. The United States Air Force deployed B-2 stealth bombers, which are designed to be nearly invisible to radar, allowing them to penetrate deep into enemy airspace without detection. These bombers carried a fearsome weapon, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, also known as the Bunker Buster. This was the first time this massive bomb, designed to destroy targets buried deep underground, was ever used in combat. It was specifically used against the Fordow facility, which is built into the side of a mountain to protect it from attack. The use of this weapon showed the American resolve to destroy even Iran's most protected sites. In addition to the air assault, the United States Navy played a critical role. American submarines, positioned silently in the waters of the region, launched approximately 30 Tomahawk land attack missiles. These are long-range cruise missiles that fly at low altitudes to avoid radar, striking their targets with high accuracy. The Tomahawks were aimed at the facilities in Natanz and Isfahan, adding another layer to the coordinated assault. The combination of stealth bombers, bunker-busting bombs, and submarine-launched cruise missiles represented a massive display of American military technology and power, designed to overwhelm Iranian defenses and achieve the mission's objectives with devastating efficiency. The final decision to launch the attack was made by President Donald Trump. He announced the strikes from the White House, standing alongside Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. In his address to the nation, President Trump stated that the goal was the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and declared that the targeted facilities were completely and fully obliterated. Significantly, this decision was made without seeking approval from the United States Congress, a move that in the immediate aftermath of the United States strikes, Iran launched a significant military retaliation of its own, aimed directly at America's closest ally in the region, Israel. Around the same time that the American bombs were falling on its nuclear sites, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched a massive barrage of ballistic missiles. The targets were major Israeli population centers, and air raid sirens wailed across cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa. The missile defense systems in Israel intercepted many of the incoming rockets, but some got through. At least 16 people were reported wounded in the attacks, bringing the reality of the war directly to Israeli civilians and demonstrating Iran's capability to inflict pain in response to the United States' action. On the diplomatic front, Iran moved quickly to rally international support and condemn the United States in global forums. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations formally requested an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. The goal was to officially protest what Iran termed the heinous attacks on its sovereign territory. By taking the issue to the UN, Iran aimed to isolate the United States diplomatically and framed the American military action as a violation of the UN Charter. This move was a key part of Iran's strategy to fight back not just with missiles, but with legal and political pressure on the world stage, hoping to win the support of other nations. Despite the heavy damage from the American bombs, Iranian officials worked to control the narrative about the state of their nuclear program. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran confirmed that the attacks had occurred, but publicly downplayed their severity. Officials claimed that the damage was not irreversible and insisted that there had been no radioactive contamination or danger to nearby residents. This assessment was later supported by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which reported no increase in radiation levels. By managing the information, Iran sought to project an image of resilience and control, suggesting that despite America's best efforts, its nuclear ambitions had not.
Really, guys, very sad moment. Iran and Israel, very tough situation for the world. United States of America and Donald Trump attack the V2 bomber for Iran. I am really and very sad and very tough situation. Please support this all country and full video watch and all details provide the video. Please full video watch and send our feedback for the comment box. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you so much, guys. Goodbye. Next part 2 coming soon.
Approaching a point of no return, threatening peace far beyond the Middle East. In stark contrast, Israel's leadership offered enthusiastic and unwavering support for the American action. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly praised President Trump, stating that the United States had taken a bold step that would change history. He confirmed that the American operation was conducted in full coordination with his government, highlighting the close alliance between the two nations. For Israel, which views Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat, the US strikes were a welcome and decisive move to neutralize that danger. In a sign of the heightened tension and expectation of retaliation, Israel immediately closed its airspace to all civilian flights, bracing for Iran's inevitable response. Within the United States, the reaction was deeply polarized, splitting largely along political party lines. Many leading Republicans, including Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, quickly voiced their support for President Trump's decision. They framed the strikes as a necessary and justified action to protect American and allied interests and to prevent a hostile nation from acquiring the world's most dangerous weapons. They argued that decisive force was the only language Iran would understand. This perspective emphasized national security and projected an image of American strength on the world stage, rallying behind the president's executive action as a legitimate use of his power as commander-in-chief. However, many Democrats, and even some Republicans, fiercely condemned the move. Democratic leaders like House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer blasted the strikes as an unconstitutional act of war. They argued that the president had overstepped his authority by launching a major military attack against another sovereign nation without first seeking the approval of Congress, as required by the US Constitution. Some libertarian-leaning Republicans, such as Representative Thomas Massey, joined in this criticism, focusing on the constitutional process rather than the policy itself. This sharp division in Washington highlighted the deep political fractures within the United States. The public reaction was one of shock and deep apprehension. While the conflict with Iran had been a feature of news headlines for years, the reality of direct military strikes and a potential war was jarring for many Americans. Major cities like New York and Washington, D.C. immediately went on high alert, increasing security at sensitive locations like government buildings, airports, and public landmarks. The fear of retaliatory attacks on American soil, whether through direct military action or through terrorist acts carried out by Iran or its proxies, became a very real concern. Families with loved ones serving in the military in the Middle East felt a particular sense of dread, waiting nervously for news in a rapidly deteriorating security situation. The emotional toll extended to the global Iranian diaspora and to American communities with ties to the Middle East. For Iranians living abroad, the news was heartbreaking. They watched from afar, filled with anxiety for their friends and relatives back home. They were caught between their new homes and their country of origin, feeling the pain of the conflict from both sides. In the United States, Arab and Muslim communities braced for a potential backlash, fearing that the conflict could fuel suspicion and prejudice against them at home. The escalation created a climate of uncertainty and fear that rippled through communities far from the actual battlefield. affecting people on a deeply personal level. Beyond the immediate fear, there was a profound sense of uncertainty about the future. For people in both Iran and the United States, the central question was, what happens now? The possibility of a long and bloody war loomed large. Young people in both countries contemplated a future that could be defined by military service, economic instability, and ongoing conflict. The dream of a peaceful and prosperous future seemed more distant than ever. The strikes did more than just destroy buildings. They shattered any remaining hope for a near-term diplomatic resolution and plunged millions of people into a state of anxiety, wondering if their leaders had just made a decision that would change their lives. Highly enriched uranium for several bombs if it chose to do so. This created a fundamental lack of trust. For American negotiators, any deal had to include foolproof inspections and the complete dismantlement of any potential path to a bomb, a demand Iran viewed as an infringement on its national sovereignty. Iran, on the other hand, approached the negotiations with its own deep-seated suspicions of American intentions. From Tehran's perspective, the United States has a long history of seeking regime change in Iran. Iranian leaders believe that even if they agreed to dismantle their nuclear program, the United States would simply find another reason to impose sanctions or apply pressure. The American withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal was seen as ultimate proof of this. Iran had agreed to limits and inspections, only to see the United States walk away from the agreement and reimpose crippling economic sanctions. This experience left Iranian leaders convinced that the United States could not be trusted to honor any new agreement, making them reluctant to offer significant concessions. The last-ditch talks mediated by Oman were doomed by this context of profound distrust and the rapidly escalating situation on the ground. As Israel and Iran began exchanging direct military fire, the space for diplomacy shrank dramatically. It is incredibly difficult to negotiate a peaceful settlement while bombs and missiles are flying. The hardliners in both Washington and Tehran gained influence, arguing that force was the only option left. Any diplomat suggesting compromise risked being seen as weak or naive. The 2-week window for talks set by President Trump was not enough time to bridge the enormous gap between the two sides, especially when the immediate crisis was escalating by the hour. Ultimately, the failure of diplomacy came down to a complete inability to find a starting point for a credible conversation. The United States demanded an end to enrichment and support for regional militias, while Iran demanded the lifting of all sanctions and security guarantees against an attack. Neither side was willing to make the first major move, fearing that the other would not reciprocate. The collapse of these talks was not a single event, but the final, predictable outcome of a long-standing stalemate. With no trust, no common ground, and an active military conflict raging, the negotiations were. The United States' action was described as a limited strike. Iran's retaliation against Israel shows it is not willing to absorb the blow without fighting back. If Iran chooses to retaliate further, perhaps by targeting United States military bases in the region or American assets, the United States would almost certainly respond with even greater force. This could trigger a dangerous cycle of escalation, where each attack is met with a stronger counterattack, drawing both nations deeper into a full-scale war that neither side may have originally wanted. Another significant danger is the conflict spreading to involve other countries and militant groups across the region. Iran has powerful allies, often called proxies, in several countries, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthi rebels. A multi-front war fought not just between nations, but also by these non-state actors, would create chaos across the entire Middle East. The economic consequences of a wider war would be felt across the entire globe. The Middle East is home to a huge portion of the world's oil supply. A major conflict could severely disrupt oil production and transportation, especially through critical waterways like the Strait of Hormuz. Any disruption to this supply would cause oil prices to skyrocket. This would lead to higher gas prices for consumers, increased costs for businesses, and could potentially trigger a global economic recession. The financial markets would become highly unstable as investors react to the uncertainty and risk of a prolonged conflict. Everyone, no matter where they live, would feel the economic pain of a war in the region. The next steps are highly uncertain and depend on the decisions made in Washington and Tehran in the coming days and weeks. The international community will likely make urgent calls for restraint, but it is unclear if those calls will be heard. One possibility is a tense, undeclared war, with periodic strikes and covert actions from both sides. Another, more terrifying possibility is a rapid escalation into open warfare. The situation is extremely volatile, and a single miscalculation, a missile, be contained within the Middle East. It would destabilize the entire global order, threaten international trade routes, and create a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions, with millions of refugees potentially fleeing the violence. The danger of escalation is real, and it puts the safety and security of the entire world at risk, reminding us how interconnected our nations have become. This crisis also matters because of its impact on the global economy. The Middle East is the heart of the world's energy supply. A war in the region would inevitably disrupt the flow of oil, causing prices to soar. This would mean more expensive gasoline at the pump, higher heating bills in the winter, and increased costs for businesses everywhere. This economic shock would be felt in the wallets of families from Tokyo to Toronto, from Sydney to Stockholm. It could slow down economic growth and even tip the world into a recession. In an era where global economies are already fragile, a major new conflict is a shock that the system can ill afford. Furthermore, this situation represents a serious challenge to international law and the institutions designed to prevent war. The United States strikes were conducted without the approval of the United Nations Security Council, and the decision to attack without congressional authorization has raised serious legal and constitutional questions within the United States itself. When powerful nations take unilateral military action, it can weaken the rules and norms that are supposed to govern how countries interact. This sets a dangerous precedent, potentially encouraging other nations to solve their disputes with force rather than diplomacy, making the world a more chaotic and dangerous place for everyone. In the end, the conflict between the United States and Iran matters because it forces us all to confront the devastating cost of war and the failure of diplomacy. It is a stark reminder that unresolved tensions and a lack of trust can lead to catastrophic outcomes. The path forward is filled with peril, and the choices made now by leaders will shape the world for decades to come. The hope for a peaceful resolution may seem distant, but the alternative, a wider, more destructive war, is a future that no one should want. This is why the world watches with bated breath, because this moment is not just about two countries. It is a crossroads for the entire international community.